Yes,
Yep.
Ken.
Yep.
Len,
Okay.
sorry.
Okay. This is a hobby of mine. I'm not a trained arborist, but it is what I do with my life these days and will be doing for the rest of my life. And so what I have is a website called Tree Treasures. And you can see the address there. I'll give you the address again at the end, lancastercountytrees.org. And I'm really building a catalog. I've got over 200 trees now, a catalog of what I call special trees in the county. And what makes a special tree? Well, I've come up with 10 or 11 categories that you see here. So a tree that's unusually old for its species. Some trees don't live that long, so it's relative to their lifespan. Size might make them special. Usually you're talking about a tree that's unusually big, but there are some miniature trees in Lancaster as well. Beauty, all trees are beautiful as far as I'm concerned, but some trees have standout beauty, and I would put them in that category. Trees that have an unusual form, trees that are rare, doesn't mean they're endangered, means they're rare for Lancaster County. Trees that are growing in an unusual location, trees that are in a container, in a pot or a bonsai. Collections of trees like botanical gardens or arboretums. Trees that have some historical interest. And then cemetery, that's not trees growing in a cemetery. It's special trees that are no longer with us. So gone but not forgotten. And then finally, tree sculptures. This includes sculptures that are made out of tree trunks once the trees die, but also sculptures of trees made out of any material at all. So I want to give you one or two examples of each of these. Again, I have over 200 entries on my website, and I only have time to kind of gloss over like 20 of them. But this would be a typical entry. So have the scientific name of the tree at top, and then the common name, weeping Higgin cherry. The address of it, this one happens to be on a corporation's property. Then I'll include the name of anyone who might have nominated the tree or told me a story about the tree or anything like that. Then I have one or two paragraphs, or however many it takes. I'll tell the story of the tree the best I can, why it is special. And then the last paragraph in italics, I always start with this amazing species, and I'll include one interesting fact about the species that the tree belongs to so that people get a broader perspective of it. I also try to include a picture of the tree in different seasons so that they get a feel for that as well. Okay, let me go through the different categories, age being the first one, and there's just one tree that everybody would include in this category, and that's a tree known as Old Sycamore. This is out by on Centerville by that fish place, and this is our most prominent tree really in the whole county. Now, you can't get an appreciation for how big that tree is from this picture. If you look at the trunk, it's hollow. And the next picture, which was taken about 15 years ago, there's 10 or 11 people can fit inside that hollow trunk. And the tree's very much alive. If you know how trees grow, the center is dead wood, and that's important for support of the tree. But all the important stuff happens on the periphery, the nutrients and water going up and down the tree trunk. So this tree is still very much alive, even though it's hollow inside. Now, there's 4 more different ways to establish or estimate the age of a tree. This tree was real easy because it had a sign out front, right? That tells me how old it is. So this one was easy to do. So this sycamore was here when the colony of Pennsylvania was still called Penn's Woods. And then if you go down to the last paragraph, the Pennsylvania Forestry Department estimated this tree to be over 250 years old in 1900. So if that was an accurate estimate, this tree would be 370 years old now, which is very, very, very old. Now, even if it was an overestimate in 1900, and it may have been, the tree's got to be 300, 350 years old, and that's excellent for trees in our county. When I see a really old tree, I like to think about a poem that William Stanley Merwin, who died recently, wrote. And this is just one stanza. It's a longer poem, but old friend, now there's no one alive who remembers when you were young. Often when I see an elderly person, I wonder what were they like, what they look like as a teenager. And I think the same thing about trees. Now, some trees only have a lifespan that's roughly as old as humans, but not sycamores. And this would be a great example. And we don't have any pictures of this tree when it was young, but we can go back 100 years. And we have found some pictures of it. You can see even the one on the far left, 1923, 100 years ago. It had that long horizontal lower branch. So it's always had that. In these pictures, the tree is perfectly healthy. It's been hit by lightning, and of course the wood-eating moths and fungi and everything have hollowed out the trunk. So now it's only, I say only, 70 feet tall. In its prime, what you see here, it was 105 feet tall. But this is our premier tree, and I could talk forever. I could have spent the whole talk just on this tree, but if you haven't seen it, it's worth the people who own it now take very good care of it. And just go to well, you'll find the address on my website, and it is by that fish place. Okay, what about size? And here again, it's trees that are unusually large. There's a program every state has called the Champion Tree Program, and people try to find the largest tree of a particular species within a state. And they also have a national program too. And we happen to have a state champion. We have we have about 20 state champions actually, but the one I want to talk about is this beautiful, beautiful ginkgo tree, which is an Asian species. You can see the leaf. You cannot mistake this tree for any other. And you can see how massive the trunk is. And this is a state champion, actually a co-champion. There's another tree that's close enough to the size of this tree to call them co-champions. That's at Tyler Arboretum. But the history of this tree is really interesting, and it focuses on a fellow who was a Japanese exchange student at Franklin Marshall College 130 years ago by the name of George Kinzo Kaneko. And he graduated from F&M, and then he went across the street to Lancaster Theological Seminary, and he got a degree there. And he was just about to go back to Japan, and he had a professorship waiting for him there. And he caught tuberculosis, which so many people did back then, and died at the local hospital, St. Joe's. And he's buried in Lancaster Cemetery. The thing about Mr. Kaneko, his family, this is amazing. His family was samurai, right? Now, this is after the samurai were still a significant fighting force, but they were still a respected class of Japanese. They were well educated. They were upper middle class financially. So they were often the exchange students from Japan. And Mr. Kaneko was such a person. Because he was samurai, either it's unclear, either his family or it could have been the Japanese government. Some people say it's the Japanese government, sent over to this country 6 ginkgo trees in his honor. And there's a long story here. You can read about it on my website if you want. But these are the 6 ginkgo trees. in Lancaster Cemetery. The champion's in the upper left there. If you look in the upper right, you can see Mr. Kaneko's tombstone, and behind him is one of his 6 trees. These are all huge. They're all 130 years old now. This is where they're located. You come into the city, go down Lemon Street. It ends at the cemetery. His tombstone is the yellow star at the end of the first traffic circle, and the 6 ginkgos surround him. Now, up until last summer, nobody knew what Mr. Kaneko looked like. There were stories about him. He would pop up here and there in the newspaper, but nobody knew what he looked like. And I got some photos of him. They were ultimately from his family. I got them from a university in Japan. And so this is like a big deal. Okay. In the first one, he's obviously the child standing. Second one, he's the tallest person there. Good looking guy. This is what he looked like at an F&M student. He was a remarkable guy. He was incredibly humble, but he was incredibly smart. He had all the characteristics that samurai aspired to. I don't have time to go into that, but he graduated from F&M as their valedictorian, even though English was his second language. And then on the right is what he looked like as a seminary student, and he was a preacher and spoke at some local churches in the county, and that's what he looked like when he passed away. So interesting story. There's a lot more to it, but that gives you a thumbnail sketch. So that's the tree that we can boast of. Now, it's only 130 years old. Now, you know, in human years, this tree would be about 4 or 5, okay, because ginkgo can live 1,000, 2,000 years. So it's still a young tree, even though it's 130 years old. Next category is beauty, and the drawing I have there is multicolored tree. Of course, you wouldn't have that in reality. Oh, I forgot about this tree. This tree is a multicolored tree. This is a bicolor dogwood, and this is right across from the health campus on Rohrstown Road. Just an absolutely beautiful, beautiful tree. And just quickly how you get a bicolor dogwood, in case you're not familiar with it. If you have a pink cultivar is cultivated variety. And so let's say you come up with a pink dogwood, you find one, and then you keep cloning it to sell that variety. What they do is take a clipping from the pink dogwood and they graft it onto the species, which is white, onto their rootstock, because it's more vigorous. You can get a lot more pink trees that way. Any branches that sprout above the grafting point are going to be pink, but any branches that sprout beneath the grafting point would of course be white. And if you want just a pink tree, you cut off all the white ones, but in this case, they let the white ones live. And here's another entry for my beauty category. This is down at Marietta. And about 100 years ago, a Marietta citizen asked the town fathers for permission, and they gave it, to plant 250 Japanese cherry trees of the Kwanzan variety. There are many Japanese cherry trees. And these line Front Street, you know, for over a mile. And in the spring, for about 2 weeks, while these guys are blooming, Marietta celebrates these trees and has a cherry blossom festival reminiscent of the one that is down in Washington, D.C. So restaurants will have special meals with a cherry theme, and drinks and desserts, and people picnic under these trees and all of that. This is rated usually in the top 5 most beautiful trees in the world. The Japanese don't consider it the most beautiful, a lot of them, cherry tree, but I sure do. And it's a gorgeous, gorgeous tree. I know I'm going fast here, Sorry if I'm talking too fast. The next category is form. And so you're talking about trees that are of an unusual form, either at the hands of Mother Nature or at human hands. And I'll give you a really good example. This is a weeping willow. It's out in New Holland. It's on an Amish farm. And it's like on tripod stilts, very, very unusual tree, right? And with this category of form, I like to think of what this reminds me of. And I include that on my website. This particular tree reminds me of a character in Lord of the Rings called Treebeard. You look at them and yeah, they could be cousins, right? So I always think that's a little entertaining. And here's another example of an unusual form. Now this is a blue Atlas cedar of the weeping variety. The species is tall and stately and huge, but the weeping variety is not, obviously. This is at Stauffer's, Kissel Hill, and off of Roarstown Road, and it's a beautiful specimen. Now, the blue Atlas cedar, there's only 2 trees in Lancaster County that you'd be able to find commonly that are from the continent of Africa, and this is one of them. The Atlas Mountains are in the northwest coast by Casablanca of Africa. Anyway, what this reminded me of when I looked at it from this particular angle, it looked like a steer, that was resting. And I thought, well, Texas Longhorn, but you look at it, Texas Longhorn, the horns go up, this one, they go down. I kept looking and I found not the Texas Longhorn, but the English Longhorn, right? And it's the same form. So it's kind of fun too. It's like finding shapes in cloud formations. So I do that with the trees that are in this particular category. Next category is rare. Again, that doesn't mean they're endangered. It means that they're rare within our county, within that geographical area. And one tree that would fit that, this is that Tanger Arboretum, which is by the Lancaster County Historical Society, Wheatland, President Buchanan's home. And this is the dove tree, Davidia. And if you look at it on the left, there's nothing remarkable about this tree. When it is bare and when it is leaf, there's nothing remarkable about it. But when it's blooming, you get these drop dead gorgeous blossoms. And it's called the dove tree because in a breeze, they're actually not flower petals. They're a modified leaf called a bract. And these white hanging bracts, remind people of doves fluttering their wings or handkerchiefs. And this tree, Davidia, it's named after Father David, who was a remarkable guy. He spent decades over in China. He was a Catholic missionary, a French missionary. And he did great work doing that, but he was also a biologist, a zoologist, and a botanist. And he sent back to France hundreds of specimens, like over 52 different varieties of rhododendron. And he sent this tree to Paris, and that's why they named it in his honor. So now this tree is the oldest one in the county, dove tree. I have one that's 30 years old, and it's actually, I'm bragging a bit, it's prettier than this tree. It's a lot taller and straighter, but they have an older one. And it was because of this tree that I got mine. I have a tree collection, 140 different types on my property. Here's another rare tree, the Angel's Trumpet. And this is at Conestoga House and Gardens, which is off Marietta Pike. This is a tropical tree. It's from South America. And so they have to move this indoors every fall. They dig it up, and that wreaks havoc on its roots, but it's a very tough tree, I am told, and it flourishes. Now there's 7 different species of Angel's trumpet in the world, and they are all extinct in the wild. But this tree is valued so much, it will never go extinct as long as human beings are around. If we go, it probably will, because it can't really reproduce on its own anymore. But you can see the amazing blossoms on this tree. And 6 of the 7 put out a terrific odor. The 7th doesn't, and it has red blossoms, and hummingbirds pollinate that. But most of the others, their odor is strongest at night, and so the pollinator is actually moths in most cases. And in this particular slide, Carolina Sphinx moth comes out at night and pollinates that tree. Okay, then location. These are trees that are growing in a weird kind of location. This picture is not of Lancaster County, but it's a great example of what I'm talking about. This is on obviously the tower of, this is a courthouse in Indiana, and this tree, it's 150 years old, and it's a tourist attraction on top of that tower. So a couple in our county, years ago, there was a newspaper article that I clipped about a birch tree that was growing inside a dead tree of another species. And so that's from the newspaper article way back when, and this is what the tree looks like today. So driving along the road, this is by Manor Shopping Center, if you know where that is. During the summer, this tree is unremarkable, right? It's a little strange looking, but in the winter, without its leaves, then you can see the white birch inside this other tree. Eventually, the other tree is going to fall apart, but it's been like this for, I don't know, 15 years or whatever. There's a nearby birch, so the seed just blew over there and sprouted in the deadwood. So that would be one example of a tree growing in an unusual location. Another example, this is down in Mountville, and there's a office building complex there, and the architect has a tree within the structure of the building. Now this is another ginkgo. Okay, now the ginkgo I showed you before was a normal ginkgo, which gets to be a huge tree. This is a cultivar that they've developed that is very narrow. So the species would never be able to grow in this tiny space, but a columnar form can. So it's bordered, as you can see, by the building itself, a walkway, and then a stairway. And they probably have to trim it a little bit, but not too much because of the nature of the growth pattern. So that's an unusual location that I would have on my website. Then trees in containers. Now, most people would think immediately of bonsai. Problem with bonsai is that most of them are in private hands. They're in people's living rooms, right? And I can't have access to them or list them. And so far, I haven't had anyone even send me a picture that I could include. So I include other trees that are growing in pots. And my favorite, you see them along the street all the time, but my favorite is at Park City, because they have a dozen fig trees. And some of you may have fig trees. They grow very well indoors. They're very tolerant of pots and indoor environment. And in fact, they are terrific indoors because they remove air pollutants from the air indoors. And these trees are very well cared for. They're about 10 feet tall, and there's 12 of them in the various locations at Park City. Now, people that have these in their homes, you look at that in America, you look at that, it's an Asian species, right? You look at that tree, you have no idea what that tree looks like in the wild. And this is what that tree looks like in the wild. I mean, look how tiny the people are. This is an amazing tree with the branching and the size. So it gives you an appreciation. And once you see these things in their natural environment, you appreciate the tree that's sitting in the corner of your living room a whole lot more.
Definitely. Now, Len, I hate to
You're
interrupt, but we
we're
may
out of
have
time.
somebody with a burning question. I mean, I would imagine you've been to Hershey Gardens and seen
Yes.
those amazing trees and some of the
Yes.
really old ones. Yep.
Yeah,
So,
no, that's not, I've restricted myself to Lancaster County,
okay.
and so I can't include those. But, I'm trying to give this talk as widely as possible because there's over 4,000 counties in America, and everyone could do what I'm doing. And it would help people appreciate the natural resources of their county and their location. So I'm hoping this spreads, and this is like a model. But yeah, I wish they have one tree that at Hershey Gardens that I saw, and I just fell in love with that tree. And so I have it on my property because of that.
Neat.
Was there
And
another question?
Kevin Engel
just
actually is asking if you're familiar with the pabigtrees.com website.
Yes, very much so. And I've gotten a lot of their, you can click on
Counties.
yeah, counties, and so that's where I've gotten a lot of the trees that I have on my website. But then there's I've come up with about a dozen other trees that are not on their website, but could be if someone nominated them.
Right.
You have to measure them in a particular way precisely, and I don't have that capability. Height is the main problem with measuring a tree. So anyway.
So one last question, anybody?
Wonderful.
If not, all right. So let's all recognize Len. Thank him for his time coming today. Fascinating,
Okay.
especially just really interesting insights on the trees that we see every day.